Hi everyone. If I learned anything from the last event that I did, it is that Facebook has a significant delay. So I'm just going to go ahead and start talking and hope that you're getting to see me as I go live and I'm not clipped. So welcome. This is the release day for my new book, The Dressmakers of London, my brand new historical fiction. I am Julia Kelly, the author of this book, and I'm really excited to share a little bit more today with you in a spoiler-free but more in-depth conversation than you might get in some other places, maybe even following along for a while, social media posts, my newsletter, things like that. And you've seen this book come up on your feeds, you've maybe pre-ordered it, maybe you went out today and got it. I want to give you a little bit more of a preview of what you can expect from the Dressmakers of London, but also to go ahead and encourage you, if you haven't gone out and purchased your copy yet, please do consider it. It is a lovely paperback. With very beautiful gold embossing and everything. And I'm really, really thrilled because this is a book that has been a long time coming. I feel like it's, been in my life through drafting and editing for ages. And I've been talking about the Dressmaker book. It was the Dressmaker book before we officially had a title when I was talking to readers about it. And now the Dressmaker book is actually out in stores, which always feels like a pretty extraordinary thing to me as an author. It goes from being this thing you work on by yourself, in your writing cave for ages and ages, and then suddenly the book comes out, it's on shelves, and readers can actually get their hands on it and read your book, which is pretty exciting. So while we are sort of gathering some people up here and getting together, if you could go ahead and drop me a comment, let me know where you're watching from. I know we have some people who are going to be watching on a re-record or on a record, so an archived version. And so people can, of course, drop comments in after the fact, and I'll be jumping in, answering questions, answering comments, and things like that as we go along, but also over the next few days as people who didn't get a chance to watch this live get a chance to actually go in and ask their questions. So if you do have questions about the Dressmakers of London, about my writing process, things in general, please do feel free to drop them in. I'm really thrilled to say that Susan, who I know was really hoping that she was going to be able to make it today, is here. I know you're in New Jersey, Susan. Ellen is in Brooklyn. We have Anne from Virginia. I am, of course, coming to you from the UK, despite my accent. So we're well represented here, and I'm sure we'll have some more people join us as well as we keep going. So again, please do drop your questions in about the Dressmakers of London. I'm going to give you a little bit of a sort of overview of what you can expect from this book. I also have my, hopefully I don't drop this here, handy dandy list of some questions that people asked before, especially people who weren't sure whether they were going to be able to make it or not. People who asked some questions, so I can go through and answer some of those pre-asked questions. So we'll have plenty to talk about. Also, just as a heads up, I will be completely honest with you, release day is always a really funny thing. It's a real combination of a lot of excitement because the book is out in the world, and then a lot of kind of sitting there and thinking to yourself, the book's out in the world, what do I do next? Because it takes time, obviously, for people to read the book, for people to recommend it to their friends, to their book clubs, for them to let me know what they thought about it, to write their reviews. And so it's always this funny mix of exciting and anticlimactic. So I've really enjoyed doing these live videos for release days because, to be honest, it just makes it a bit more exciting, and I get to hang out with you guys. So always a lot of fun. We have Brenda from British Columbia, Scott from England, and we have a first question from Anne, which leads us right into what I was going to tell you about. So first of all, Anne is asking, what was your inspiration for this book? So I feel like I should probably give you a bit of an overview of what you can expect when it comes to the Dressmakers of London, and then talking about the inspiration will really make a bit more sense, I think. So The Dressmakers of London is a historical novel. It's set in World War II, and the premise of the book is that there is a family of women who are all centered around Mrs. Shelton's Fashions, which is a dress shop. So Mrs. Shelton, Molly Shelton, is the mother, and then you have Izzy and you have Sylvia. Izzy is the youngest daughter, and she is a talented seamstress in her own right. So she's really kind of come up in her mother's footsteps as the sort of heir apparent to this dress shop. She, from a young age, realized that she had this talent for dressmaking. She's learned the business, and now she's starting to feel that she wants to expand her wings a little bit. Not necessarily by going out in the world, but by expanding what they offer at Mrs. Shelton's Fashion. So Izzy is very keen on designing, and she's always got a sketchbook with her. She's sort of trying to work up the nerve to convince her mother that they should start incorporating some more modern design. So this book is set in 1941 and 1942. Mrs. Shelton's Fashions was successful. Molly Shelton was successful in the 1920s. And so some of her designs that have worked for her for years and years are starting to feel a bit dated to Izzy. And so Izzy is trying to convince her mother that it's time to kind of, look for inspiration in other places, look to France and what designers are doing there, look to Hollywood, look to new silhouettes, kind of more streamlined fashion, and her mother's having none of it. So that's Izzy at the beginning of the book. Meanwhile, her sister, Sylvia, got married young. She got married at 18. She met a man who was in several socioeconomic and class levels higher than her. He's a Harley Street doctor, boarding school educated, public school educated, as you'd say in the UK, which is private school in the US. And he basically saw this beautiful young woman in Sylvia and sort of plucked her up out of her mother's dressmaking shop and decided, this is the woman for me. And so that created some tension between Sylvia and her mother and Izzy. And unfortunately, the women have been estranged since Sylvia was married. And so at the beginning of the book, you have Sylvia doing her sort of society charity work, lots of work for refugees during the war, lots of work for, coat drives and food drives and things like that. And then you have Izzy working with her mother at the dress shop, trying to contend with the challenge that was clothing rationing, which had come in the early years of the war. And clothing rationing was a sort of graduated thing. It was introduced and then it became more restrictive. There were more things that you could or could not buy, and the volume of clothing that you could buy also became more and more restricted during the war in Britain. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But basically, at the beginning of this book, you have Izzy doing her thing, you have Sylvia doing her thing, and unfortunately for Izzy and Sylvia, this is not a spoiler because it happens very early in the book. Izzy and Sylvia's mother dies, and Izzy assumes that her mother will have left the dress shop to her because she's the one who's been working there. But when it comes time to read the will, they soon realize that their mother has done something neither of them expected, and she has left the shop jointly to Izzy and Sylvia. Now, as you can imagine, with estranged sisters, this causes a lot of problems, and immediately Izzy is furious. She feels really hurt at what's happened, and Sylvia turns around and says, I will sell the shop to you. Izzy insists on a fair market price. She doesn't want any charity from her wealthier sister, and so Sylvia says, okay, tell me what it is that you tell me what it is. Rather, I will tell you what it is that I'm going to sell this shop to you for. And Izzy is trying to sort of get everything together to make this sale happen. And then sort of the larger world intervenes, and Izzy finds out that women who were under the age of 30 are being conscripted for the first time in Britain for service. And so she ends up being forced to join, in her case, the women's auxiliary of the Air Force. And so she now has nobody to run the shop while she is away training and then serving. And so she's forced to call on her sister, Sylvia. And this book really explores what it takes for these two sisters to come back together, to repair their relationship, and to sort of shift their perspective and to grow and change. And a lot of the book is actually told through letters because, of course, with Izzy being conscripted, being sent away for training, Sylvia and Izzy are exchanging letters back and forth about the shop. And through those letters, they have the opportunity to actually reconnect with each other in a way that I don't think they would have had they just continued living in London, doing what they had been doing before. So this is the Dressmakers of London. Now, when it comes to talking about the inspiration behind this book, there were a few things I think that just sort of bubbled up. It's a funny thing being an author. Sometimes you can point to something very distinct, and you can say that was the inspiration for this. I read this, I watched this movie, I saw an article, or I ran across this historical figure while I was researching. And that's not the case in this book. This is a book that really is drawn from a lot of different areas of inspiration. So I think a couple of them are that I have a sister of my own. So I've always wanted to write about sisters, but never had come up with the right book before. So I wanted to explore that dynamic. So that's a bit of it. I live in London, which of course also means that I do love exploring that city, and setting the book there was a natural thing. So obviously you have the in of London in the title, inspired by that. But the big inspiration was probably on the dressmaking front. Was I've always had an interest in historical fashion. I've always been interested in clothing rationing and trying to understand what that would have been like living on the home front, at home, continuing on as best they could with normal life. How did it affect people? How did it make their choices different? What did it actually mean to live, on the ration? And what did that mean for people whose whole business was selling clothes, like a dressmaker? Being a big copycat, my sister had started to learn how to dressmake a couple years before I started this book. I got very jealous and asked for a sewing machine for Christmas, and so I started to learn how to sew. I've knitted for years and years, and in fact, I didn't get much sleep yesterday night, just as a heads up. So originally I was planning on actually doing some knitting while chatting with you, but I think there's enough chaotic energy going on during release day for me not to need to bring that in. My sister and I are going to be doing an event on Instagram, an Instagram live tomorrow, where we're going to have a knit and chat. It's a very informal thing, and I think I'm going to go ahead and bring this along for my knitting. But today we're going to focus on questions and answers. So I was learning how to dress make. I was making some wearable, but mostly unwearable things, but I was learning a lot. I have a huge amount of respect for anybody who makes clothes, anybody who makes their own clothing, the skill that it takes, and the amount of discipline and the learning curve is so big, because again, I've been knitting for probably 25, 30 years, and at this point, and when it comes to dressmaking, it was all brand new, and I sort of knew enough to know that I wasn't very good. And so all of these things I think fed into the idea of writing about estranged sisters, writing about a dress shop, and along with that, whenever you're an author, you think, where are my characters going to start in the story, and then where do I want them to go? So if I start with estranged sisters, I'm not going to have a book where they spend the whole time not speaking to one another and nothing changes and nothing happens. I always want my characters to grow and go through some sort of transformation, or learn something about themselves, and be in a situation where they evolve in some way. So if you have estranged sisters at the start of a book, you've got to have something that brings them together, so that even if they don't resolve all of their conflict, they're forced to reckon with what has happened in the past and forced to address their estrangement. And for me, that was unfortunately bumping off their mom early on in the book. I promise it's not horrible, it's not grim, but I did, in order to bring that inheritance element into the story, I did make the decision that that would be sort of the central catalyst that would get these sisters back together, and get them moving. When it comes to the format of the book, I go back and forth between the sisters' POVs, and then, of course, there are these letters weaving back and forth throughout the entire book. And sometimes you will read about something, and then you'll read the letter of somebody conveying that, or somebody reacting to something. And of course, there's a delay in the post, so you're getting people revealing things at different points in time. You're getting characters going through this ongoing evolution. And I've always loved that about epistolary novels. So I wanted to make sure to try to lean on that because, again, we have, somebody in London and somebody at training camp. Izzy is training to be a member of a barrage balloon unit. So she has her basic training, then she goes to a specialist training camp, and then she goes off to Norfolk to be a part of the defense in Norfolk, and her barrage balloon unit is dispatched there. So of course she's not nipping back and forth to London all the time. She has to write to her sister, especially given how little access she would have had to regular phone calls and things like that. So that gives you a kind of an idea of where the Dressmakers came from and what the inspiration was behind them. I also read very early on in writing this book a fantastic book by Juliet Summers, and I do keep laughing that I'm just following her around in terms of my research. I'm sorry, Julie Summers. Um, Her book is called Fashion on the Ration: Style in the Second World War, and she is a really wonderful author of sort of popular history of she focuses in a lot of cases on women, not always but often on women. I have referenced her work for The Lost English Girl. She wrote a book about the evacuees who came home after Operation Pied Piper, and I also read a book of hers. I want to say it was called The Uninvited Guest. It's been a while, but I read that book of hers for The Last Garden in England. So I swear I'm not just plumbing her books for ideas, but it's really handy that she and I seem to have some similar interests. So yes, so that's a bit of the inspiration and the research behind the book. Again, if you do have questions, please feel free to drop them in the comments. If you are watching this on the recording, please feel free to drop them in the comments also, because I'd be very happy to go in and answer some of those things for you after the fact. So again, we have some pre-asked questions here, which is really handy. And so I got a question about whether this book is inspired by family history, um, going on our previous question of inspiration. This book is not a book that's drawn from family history or family experiences, but my sewing DNA is quite strong. So I have a grandmother on one side who was a dressmaker herself, although I don't know a huge amount about her dressmaking business. I have cousins who have been seamstresses at a very high level for Royal Opera, Royal Ballet, organizations like that, sort of that caliber. And then I also have a grandmother on the other side who is a very talented quilter. Also made all of the kids' clothes growing up. And my cousin on that side too, who's very dear to me, actually made a 1940s pattern. What would you call it? A sort of, this is where my American and English gets all mixed up. I want to say a dressing gown, and it was a dressing gown, but it was more than a dressing gown. It was this sort of 1940s inspired, um, very fabulous robes, basically, sort of like dressing gown robe thing. And she made that actually for my wedding. So that is now a family heirloom that we can pass from, hopefully, from bride to bride. And I was lucky enough to wear it first, and it has a bit of our great grandmother's handmade lace in it as well. So really wonderful things. We have a lot of crafty genes in my in my family. Lots of sewing, lots of knitting. But this, in terms of the actual inspiration for the book, it's purely fiction. It's just an interest in these topics and letting my imagination go wild. So it's been a lot of fun getting a chance to really dream up what this world would be and dream up what these women would have done faced with the circumstances they were faced with. So let me just check in on live comments really quickly, and then we'll go back if we need to some of the pre-asked ones. Roseanne says, I'm the youngest of 5 children, 4 girls. I'm grateful that we were involved in sewing at a very young age. We rode the bus to the local YMCA and had a wonderful sewing teacher. That sounds Fantastic. That's actually what I'm looking for. So my sewing machine's in storage right now, but once it's out of storage, I'm going to sign myself up for some sewing lessons and kind of go back to basics and learn properly all the things that I kind of probably picked very bad habits up for. Um, she says she made beautiful clothes because her husband traveled to Europe and she had access to beautiful fabrics. I'm sure those were wonderful. Because of this, I've always admired fabric and texture. It's also a plus that I can still run an old fashioned sewing machine and follow a pattern. It's a skill that you don't forget. I think that is. That's a good one. Um, so let's see. We also have a question from Suzanne here. Suzanne says, I'm sorry, Susan, my apologies. I was just talking to somebody called Suzanne last week in person, so I think I've just transplanted names there. My apologies, Susan. I've read most, if not all, of your historical fiction books, and I can't remember if you've ever written epistolary novels. Did you have a difficulty adjusting to the type of writing? I've read several books that use that technique, and I do enjoy them. I enjoy them as well, and I think I am guilty of sometimes assuming that an epistolary novel needs to be a novel of letters in order to count as an epistolary novel, and I think it's broader than that actually. I have, if diary entries count, which I think they do, um, they do to me. I have used diary entries in the Light Over London, um, and I'm trying to think. I think that might be the only other one that sort of leans heavily on documents. The Diary in the Light Over London, which was my first historical novel, that one is it's again it's sort of the catalyst that kicks off the whole story, and it's also the connector between, it's a dual timeline book, so it's the connector between the present day story and the which I think embarrassingly is set in like 2017. I It feels like I wrote that book yesterday, and it's not yesterday. Anyway, so I believe the diary is the connector between the present day story and the historical story, and it has a little bit of a mystery, a family twist as part of it. So you kind of follow along through that. There's also a box of objects that is found with the diary that all connect up to the story. So yeah, I think that's the closest I've gotten, and I've had a letter here and there in books, but nothing as heavily reliant on letters for the structure of the storytelling. Um, it was different. It's funny. I am old enough to have written letters. I'm old enough to remember receiving letters. I haven't written a letter in so long. I think, no, I know, and I don't think I'm going to embarrass him if I say this because it was me who did it. I wrote my husband letters when we first got together because we were not living together at the time. It was very early in dating. And so I did drop a couple of letters into the post to him. I very, very early on in dating, and I gave him some letters for our first anniversary as well, to open up one letter every month for a year, which was such a cute idea and such a romantic idea. The problem was he's such a lovely man, but he really, really wanted me to sit and read the letters with him while he opened them. And so I had the mortification of going through once a month and having my own letter read, read back to me that I had written, like in some cases a full year before. And I get bashful about, I'm the sort of author where I'm very happy to give. So, for instance, my mother in law, I always send her a copy of one of my books. And I always, always say, you can read it, you cannot read it. Please don't feel obligated to tell me, because I just feel mortified about the idea of somebody reading my work in front of me and live reacting to it. There's something that I've just never quite I've never gotten over the embarrassment. So there you go. But when it came to writing these letters, I did have some fits and starts, and I think I got more into the groove with it the longer I went on, and the further I got into the manuscript. And part of that is, like anything that's not just your standard prose, you really want it to add to the book rather than reiterate something that you've already seen. So, for instance, if you have a character saying, these are the things that happened to me, and I'm telling you about them, and here's why I'm telling you about them, I want there to be a reason why you as the reader are seeing that letter, and it's not just, well, this is, a loyal, faithful report of what this person wrote to this other person. I want you to get an insight into, either are they hiding something? Is the letter not quite the way that we saw things play out on the page a few pages ago in the prose section? Um, is it because they are having a revelation, or they're processing something, or they're admitting something because they're reacting to writing down the event, and telling somebody about that event through a letter? And one of the things I really enjoyed a lot about using this form was, I think that often, much like me writing letters to my now husband, sometimes there are things that are easier to say in writing than they are in person, especially when you're talking about big emotions, especially when you're talking about something where you're not 100% sure how the other person may feel about it, may react. Sometimes it's easier, even now, sometimes it's easier to send a text than it is to have that conversation in person when you're sort of first feeling things out. So I think in some ways, um, the letters were a really great way to do that. And with these two sisters, because they're so far apart at the beginning, and there's a willingness on one sister's side to reunite, and there's a real resistance on the others. And I think, you realize that the willingness of the one sister, she still has to go through some rounds of, you don't get to just slot yourself back into somebody's life with no sort of what's the word I'm looking for, repercussions, or no sort of reckoning, that's the word, no reckoning of what, you know they went through, how they felt about it, what you need to maybe apologize for and need to address. And then in the terms of the sister who is resistant to the idea of, any contact again, she is really, she's sort of a bit like that, and at an arm's length, and in a way sort of having that relationship start to open up again with her sister. It makes her really realize how much she's missed her sister, and how much she would really like an element of what they had before. I think, when people have these big rifts, they aren't necessarily coming back, and their relationship isn't exactly as it was before. And that's one of the things I wanted to explore throughout the book, is how do you, years on, as different people, because you've grown and changed, how do you come back together again? So yes, it was a challenge, but one that I was really enjoying. And I think, again, I'm the book that I'm writing right now, I'm also using some letters. I'm not using them in quite the same way as this book. It's more sort of one-sided. You see one person's correspondence going out, and you don't get the response back in, at least in this draft, because you have no idea until a book is sort of in the final stages of production, the entire form of a book. But for now, I'm writing it so that the main character is writing to somebody else, and you're not actually getting the response back from the person they're writing to. So it's more about how that character is feeling, and how that character is revealing information to this other person. And in that case, this character is holding things back and is intentionally painting a very different story than what we're seeing on the page, as well, as me, the writer, right now, but future readers will be seeing. Um, all right. I got a question which I thought was really interesting about why I decided to pick the year I decided for this story. So, if you have the war, you have the war from 1939 to 1945. I've written about the later part of the war. I've written about the early part of the war. With my Evelyn Redfern books, I've written about 1940 and the Blitz, and same with the Light Over London. There's elements that touch on the Blitz. Um, this book is set late 1941 to, I want to say, late spring, early summer. We're testing my memory here, but I think it's late spring, early summer of 1942. And the reason for that is actually really simple. It's because we have a pretty significant historical event, which is the conscription of women. So there are specific things that the government ordered, but essentially what they wanted to do was free men up from jobs that were not active combat roles that women could do. So, for instance, this is how you get women who are trained to become mechanics, trained to become drivers, ambulance drivers. You have women who are working in manufacturing. You have the land girls who are working in agricultural roles. And so conscription was a really wide thing. It captured a lot of women, so single or married women who had no children. So if you didn't have a dependent, so either a child or an older person who was in your care, you were expected to show up and register, and you were then, hopefully you got your pick. Not everybody got their pick, but you could register an interest in, or you would be sort of selected for one of the branches of uh, the auxiliary services. So those were the Wrens, which is the auxiliary service for the Navy, the Royal Navy. Um, and those women were had a reputation for having the best uniforms. Often, somewhat posher women were conscripted into the Wrens, but not always. You had the ATS, which is the auxiliary for the army, which I wrote about in the Last Garden in. I'm sorry, which I wrote about for the Light Over London. And then you had the WAF, which is the Air Force as well. And you had some additional, like for instance, in the Light Over London, the main character is sort of seconded to the Royal Artillery because she's one of the ACAC girls. So that was a sort of, she was in the ATS, but also the RA. You had women who served obviously in medical roles as nurses. You had women who were ferrying planes to off of bases to be moved and delivered. You had, again, the land girls. So there's just so many roles that women could have taken. And a big one was also manufacturing roles. So women going into the factories. So, an American is very, very familiar with the image of Rosie the Riveter. You had women going in British factories as well, lots of munitions factories, but lots of different things. So that was a really wide-reaching order, and it meant that if you were not within that initial order, and there were more women who were pulled in later, but if you were not in that initial order, you of course would then have had to probably, if you had somebody who, you had a family where your husband, brother, father, uncle, whoever was the main male figure in your family, was off to war, and then your sort of younger, able-bodied sister, aunt, cousin, daughter, whoever was then sent in for conscription, you would have things that you would have to pick up as well. So women ran businesses. There were women taxi drivers, although there were not that many taxis available because obviously of petrol rationings and things like that. But you had women fulfilling a lot more jobs. I wrote about a young woman filling the role of a postwoman in Liverpool in the Lost English Girl. I have lots of L's and lasts and losts in my titles, so sometimes on the fly I can trip over my words. And so you have this shifting of women's roles across a lot of different areas in society, and I just think that that's such an interesting thing to write about. It's such good fodder for a historical fiction author because you're looking for these moments of big change, not only for your characters but big changes in society, so that it could be realistic that your character might be going through a different or an unusual experience in their life. So that's a little bit about why late 1941 and then the first half of 1942 were the period of time that I highlighted. Um, I had another question here, I think from Susan actually, a pre-asked question. What is your favorite part of the writing process? And I wanted to talk about this because I think this book is a really good example of this. So I pitched, the way that this typically works for me is I pitch to my editor, and this was the first book of a contract, so I had to do a whole brand new pitch. Didn't know if she would like it, and fortunately she did. So she took the idea on pitch, and then I said, "That's great. I've given you I think it was a 3-page synopsis. It might have actually even been shorter than that, telling you what's going to happen in this book." And then she said, "Great, go ahead. We got a contract going. Go ahead and write the book." And so I sat down to write the book, and I very swiftly realized that I had not fully gotten myself comfortable with the characters. So, usually for me, the way that it works is I will write a synopsis, I'll outline, I'll try to figure out who these characters are, and I will really do my best to nail down as many of the big elements, knowing that the story always changes, but ideally I like to know who it is that I'm writing about. So not just from a research perspective, but a personality perspective, because it makes a really big difference to how you go about throwing things in a character's path, and how they react is what drives the plot forward, right? So I really wanted to get to know Izzy, get to know Sylvia, figure out what was at the root of this conflict that they had, and I thought I had it, and I had the bones of it, but I just hadn't figured out exactly what this sister dynamic was and how this was going to all unfold. So I wrote the first part of this book. I think it's in 4 parts. Again, you can tell how long it's been since I wrote this, and how many books I've been working on over the last couple of years, because I'm 99% sure that it's let me just double check. Yeah, 4 parts. So I wrote part one, and part one is actually pretty true to what I wrote in my very, very, very first draft in terms of the structure. So, the opening of it, how we get to know the characters, the inciting incident of their mother dying, and the inheritance of the dress shop, and then basically Izzy having to ask her sister to help her because of conscription coming in and changing all of her plans. So that's actually always stayed pretty locked, which is great. It's a real luxury. Everything that came after that was a bit more of a challenge. So I really enjoy being a writer, and I should caveat this with I love being a writer. I feel very, very lucky to be able to do this. Sometimes I find the writing, this is going to sound a bit mad, but the writing of a first draft is the hardest part for me. And that's because you're creating something brand new. So you're creating brand new worlds, brand new characters, brand new situations, things that have never existed before out of complete thin air. And so for me, I find that sometimes that can be especially challenging because it's very exhausting. It's tiring embodying these characters, trying to figure out how they would act, how they would feel, building the world around them, figuring out what you're going to do with them. How do you propel the plot forward? What's the resolution? What are you working towards? And I don't think I had enough of that sort of what are you working towards figured out. And so I did a lot of sort of bad working days, if I'm being completely honest, where I sat down and I eked out, I don't know, for me, not very many words. So with 1,000, maybe 1,500 words. And on a good day, when I'm writing and I'm sort of in a good spot with a manuscript, I usually write somewhere between 2,500 and 3,000 words, which adds up very, very quickly. And it's great. And that's such a luxury. When it's not working, it really feels like pulling teeth. And I can sit there for 8 hours at my computer and eke out 1,200 words and not feel very good about them and know that there's something off. And at this point, I've written enough books. I think I've written 17 books that have been published, traditionally published. I have an instinct for when things are just not working. I also usually have an instinct for how to fix those things. And sometimes normally I will try to just write straight through. I will follow my outline that has enough flexibility in it that I can play around with the characters but not be completely not be completely lost. But with this book, I really was stuck, and I was at about 40,000 words. This book is about 120,000 words to give you an idea, and it's about a 400, a little bit more than 400 pages. And I think because of its letters, it looks a bit more expanded out sometimes. Um, so I got about a third of the way through the book, and I just felt like I was hitting a brick wall. And so I took a step back and I said, okay, what has worked for you in the past when this thing happens? And I thought, it's always about the characters. It's always not working because something isn't right with the people that I'm writing about. They aren't feeling like real people. They aren't reacting like real people would react. They don't have enough motivation or enough layers that would kind of lead you to believe that they're they're real people in real situations. And I tend to write about women in sort of emotional and vulnerable moments and having these big changes in their lives, and that can be pretty emotionally draining as an author. So if it's not working, it's really really not working because the emotion isn't flowing. And so I basically went back and I read through what I had, and I started tearing up everything after part 1. And I'm so glad I did, because it just started to click, and I cannot tell you how quickly the last 2 months of writing this book went after I cracked it. And I went through and I rewrote all the stuff that wasn't working, and I took stuff out and I added stuff in. At this point, I can't even tell you all the stuff that I took out and added in, because I think I was just a bit stuck. I couldn't see the forest through the trees. And so this is a really really good example of, you could go in with the best of intentions, and some books are a dream. I'm looking at you, The Last Garden in England, and also A Traitor in Whitehall. They just write, and they write easily, and it's such a gift when that happens. And some books are really tough to get right, and sometimes it takes a couple of drafts, and sometimes it takes some work with your editor to get those books in shape. But once they are, it is so so satisfying, because you as an author know nobody else is ever going to know, not even your editor is going to know all the things that you went through to get that final book, the thing that you actually see in stores. You have no idea what went into this, but I remember, and I remember what it felt like. So a couple of the books that have been the toughest are some of the books I'm the most proud of, so this is one of them. Although this didn't give me as much trouble as some other ones. And the other two that were really, really tough were the Lost English Girl and The Whispers of War. I took those books apart, I put them back together again, I took them apart, I put them back together again. I'm so proud of the final result. So I'd say that The Dressmakers of London is a mix of all of those things. It's sort of the experience of knowing enough at this point in my career, knowing enough about me, knowing enough about my writing patterns to know something's not working, to know I have to go back and fix it, because otherwise I'm never going to get to the end of the book and I'm just going to be sunk. So yeah, it was quite something, and lots of revisions, and I'm sure I wrote many many more words than you see in this final draft. But again, I'm very proud of what I ended up with. So again, if you have questions, please do go ahead and drop them in the comments. I'm just scrolling back really quickly to see if I've missed anything. And I see we've had a few more people say hello and say where they're from as well. Um, this is very, very kind of you. How did I come up with the cover? I stepped back and let the people who actually know what they're doing with covers do their jobs. I am not a graphic artist. I am not a cover designer. I am not a visual artist at all. I gave absolutely no feedback, except I would really like to make sure that the clothing reflected on the cover, because obviously it had to have clothes. It's a dressmaking shop, right? The clothing reflected on the cover was period appropriate. And the reason is that I have, in a previous life, I was a romance novelist. There's not a huge amount of selection that you get for, Victorian romance novels in terms of covers and imagery that hasn't been used a million times before. And so it can sometimes be really, really tricky. And sometimes you get beautiful covers with period inaccurate dress. And it never bothered me, because I know enough about what goes behind the scenes and how difficult it is to find those images. But I did get some unhappy emails from people who were not very pleased that there was period inaccurate clothing on the cover of a Victorian romance novel. So I was insistent it's got to be period appropriate. And I think my editor, Hannah, went to bat for me as well, because I remember an email and she said, "We've seen some beautiful covers. The dresses are all wrong." So I'm assuming that there was some behind the scenes I can already tell you Julia's not gonna like this one. It's gotta be appropriate for the time. So that's why you have this. And I also love the fact that it's got the ivy on the side. Um, this is sort of a ivy was a big feature on the Last Garden in England as well. So I'd love just that little callback to a previous cover. My apologies for my bangs; these are just out of control today. So we're doing our best. Um, there was a change on this cover. It's a subtle one, but you can see it in some of the promotional and marketing materials on social media. Some of it will have Big Ben and some of the London skyline in the background reflected in the glass. The publisher actually decided midway through the process to take that out. So it's just the glass panel behind. So it's a little bit less busy, a little bit less distracting. So I don't think it obviously it doesn't immediately strike you as a huge change, which is nice. I've had covers that have changed dramatically midway through the process. So just having a little thing taken out was actually quite nice because it was very easy to continue to promote the book. So yes, I have very talented cover designers. I am always sure to thank them profusely in the back of the book because I cannot do what they do, and I cannot take the things in my head, the words in my head, and translate them to images like this. I just don't have the skill. So I know when I'm good at something and I know when I'm not good at something, or I'd like to think I do. Um, so yes, thank you, Anne, for saying the cover is beautiful. I do appreciate that. I agree with you. Um, so I thought I would talk a little bit more about while I grab a sip of water. Obviously, please do ask any questions that you have. But I thought I'd talk a little bit about sort of my uh, reading life recently because I always get questions about what I've been reading, what I've been enjoying, all sorts of stuff like that. And I think one of the great things about being an author is that you always start from a place of having been a reader, because you fall in love with books or you come to books later in life, or whatever your story is, inevitably, in order to learn how to write, you have to be a pretty voracious reader, I think. So that's always the bit of advice that I give people um, who are first starting out writing. So we're going to talk books now. So some of you who follow me on Instagram and here on Facebook might notice that I, hopefully more and more consistently recently, I'm working on getting better at this. I've been posting my Friday reads, and also, I was going to drop a link to that. Let me do that here. So while I grab this, I also have a newsletter which is hosted on Substack, so you'll hear me sometimes call it my Substack. So in that newsletter every month, I have been going ahead and basically giving you a roundup of what I've read for the last month. Sometimes it's a couple months combined if I'm on deadline, but basically what I try to do is give you a sense of what does a working author who writes in historical fiction and historical mystery read on a regular basis. And when I'm in the middle of drafting something, I can tell you it's a little bit less historical mystery and historical fiction than during times when I normally am reading, but it's been a lot of fun, and so I thought I would chat a little bit about what has really stood out to me this year. I felt like I kind of dropped the ball a little bit reading at different points in time last year. There's a lot going on. I went through a move, all of that stuff, so a bit up in the air. But what I have read so far this year, I have really enjoyed. So I thought I'd share a few things with you. So for historical fiction fans, which I hope if we're sitting here chatting today, I would hope we're all historical fiction fans. I really enjoyed the book The Glassmaker by Tracy Chevalier. Now, this is a book, I've never read one of hers before. It's a big miss on my part. I need to remedy that because I really enjoyed this. I thought it was beautifully done. It has a it has a sort of touch of magical realism to it, but it's mostly pretty grounded historical fiction. It's about a young woman who is part of a glass-blowing family on Moreno in the Venetian lagoon. So Moreno was one of the islands. It was dedicated to glass blowing, and it was where those artisans all lived and where Their glass blowing factories were as well. Boreno, I think it is. I've been there, so I apologize if I've mispronounced. Was the lace making island. So there were sort of trades that were designated to different areas. She is part of the glass blowing, one of the glass blowing families, and she becomes, for various reasons, a very skilled lamp work bead maker. And so it sort of follows her and her family, but also because there's this magical realism thing. Basically, what the author has done is said time doesn't really work the way that you and I experience time in the Venetian lagoon. And so you have this very slow progression of, I think, often it's jumps of 8 years in the character's life, but across the actual book, you'll get 80 years or 100 years have passed, and you sort of see, not only see her life change and evolve and get the story of her life with her family, you also get the story of Venice and the glass blowing trade and sort of how it evolves and changes from all the way in the plague days, gosh, all the way through to present day. And it's fascinating. It's such an interesting sort of framing device for a book, and I really, really enjoyed it. That was one that I thought people who read my stuff will probably enjoy that. I also have a recommendation to watch out for because this is not going to be available until the summer. But one of the nice things about being an author is getting to read things that are um, oh, we've got Deb says loved Glassmaker the way I think I remember you saying that you were reading this as well, Deb. Maybe for a book club, but maybe just on your own. I can't quite recall, but yes, I'm so glad that you loved it as well. She says the way that she covered all the history of the same characters is amazing. I really loved that as well, and I thought there were some really lovely strands to it. I don't want to say too much because I don't want to give things away because I feel like people should figure it out themselves, but let's just say dolphins. And dolphins are a big theme, and you'll understand why that's really important and really satisfying at the end. Um, so yes, so the book I was going to recommend that's coming out in the summer, so one to keep an eye out for. Sarah James has written two books, I believe. I read her debut. I haven't read her second one, but I got a chance to do an early read of her third, which is a historical mystery. It is set it is set during World War II. I think it's 1942, and essentially it's during one of these sort of patriotic war bond raising train travel, almost vaudeville acts that these Hollywood figures went on. And basically, the setup is that you have this absolutely fab uh, Jacqueline. Am I going to remember her last name? No, I'm not. But anyway, Jacqueline, our main character, is a real star, but she's a star on the decline, even though in her head, of course, she's not declining at all. But she's been getting older. She has a reputation for being difficult, being very demanding. And so she is essentially put on this train caravan to try to burnish her reputation and show the studios that actually she can be a team player. She is not as difficult as everybody says she is. And of course, not very far into the trip, there is a murder, and basically it sets off this whole series of events. And she decides that she's going to investigate. She is the mystery was great. Don't get me wrong. I really enjoyed the mystery. Read the book for the main character. She is a scream. She's an old school Hollywood star, a real diva star, but she never annoyed me with her sort of divaness. I came out of the book thinking, yeah, she's absolutely right. Everybody here is not respecting the fact that she's right about these things and she should be listened to. She was a lot of fun. She's just comes off the page, and she's such a great character. I really hope that Sarah James is able to write more about her. I don't know. I think the book very nicely wraps up, but in my heart of hearts, I would love another one. So I don't know Sarah personally, so I can't sit there and be like, please, please write more. But my wish for the bookish universe is that we will get more from this set of characters. And then the other book that I wanted to recommend, well, two more that I wanted to recommend. So one is a mystery, and that's really easy and straightforward. So it's the Di Caius Beecham. It's pronounced, depending on who you are in the UK and how you do this, it's either pronounced Beauchamp or Beecham um, series. And I read The In Crowd, which is the second book in the series. The first book, I'm going to test my knowledge here and I'm going to get it wrong, so I'm going to look it up. The other half. I really enjoy these books. They're really fun. It's a sort of detective entering into the upper crust to investigate murders in modern day London, and it's obviously becoming an interconnected series. And there's a sort of larger arc that's going on right now. I'm excited to see that she's got another book coming out, I believe, in again in the summer. So I really enjoyed those a lot. I thought the detective was a lot of fun. He's a he's a sort of a lovely character. I'll let you figure out how to uh, sort of why he's such a lovely character and why I like him. Oh, Ellen, I'm so sorry. So the name of the Sarah James book that I was recommending is Last Stop Union Station. Really helps if I give you the name of the book along with the author. My apologies. So that's Last Stop Union Station. The book I was just talking about, the mystery series, it's The In Crowd, is the second book, and the other half is the first book in the D.S. Caius Beauchamp series by Charlotte Vassell. So I know those are available in the US and they're also available here in the UK too. And then the last book I wanted to recommend, talking about interesting women, sometimes difficult reputations. This is actually a biography, so it's actually straight history. It's not fiction, but man, does it read like fiction sometimes. Sonia Purnell read, or rather wrote, the book Kingmaker, Pamela Churchill Harriman's astonishing life of power, seduction, and intrigue. And so, if you are a World War II fiction reader, I think you're going to find this book absolutely fascinating. So, this is the story of the woman who was Churchill's daughter in law. She married his son Randolph, and she became a really important figure. Um, Sonia Purcell argues for Churchill in the war in sort of a soft power capacity. She was instrumental in bringing together high ranking members of the Allied forces, and sort of plumbing them for information and getting a sense of what they were thinking about, how they felt about things. And Churchill basically had her report to him directly about what those men were thinking, and how she could also potentially draw people into thinking in a way that was sympathetic to Churchill. She has a reputation, there's no getting around it, and I think she was pretty unashamed about it, of being a concubine and basically using wealthy men to advance herself. She was, I should say, a deeply complicated person, fascinating person, lived an incredibly um, interesting life, and ends up in the United States. Some of you may remember her as being pivotal to Clinton's campaign, his election campaign, and she actually ends up becoming ambassador to France at the end of her life. And I just thought the book was so well done. It's so well researched, and it's just really interesting. I think one of the things that I admire is when a historian obviously has a point of view, wants to maybe correct the record as they see it of somebody's reputation and really wants to dive into who that person really was, but also is not ashamed of showing the less pleasant, less palatable parts of a person's life as well. And I think this is one of those really wonderfully approached, wonderfully balanced books. So if you're interested in this time period, I would really strongly recommend it. It's fascinating. The number of people that she knew, and the names that rattle through this book and go in and out of her life are just fascinating. So hopefully those are some books for your TBR. I would love to hear what it is that you're reading. I would also love to hear if you've had a chance to pick up The Dressmakers of London, if you've started reading it, what you think of it. Please, any reviews that you can leave or any feedback that you can give, it's always such a help because it helps other readers find books like The Dressmakers of London if it is for them, or stay away if it's not for them, because not every book is for every person. And I think it's important that people find books that they're really going to love. So thank you so much for watching. Again, please do feel free to ask any questions that you might have in the comments. I will continue over the next few days to come back and take a look at what has dropped into the comments with the re-record. I also want to make sure that you know that my newsletter, I've dropped a link in there, is available. That's where you can kind of find all of the things. That's the first place that I post new covers, titles, news about the books. Often, if there are things like Goodreads giveaways, you'll find those in the newsletter, and you'll also get a bit of an insight into what I'm up to, what I'm working on. And really quickly, Ellen, it's Kingmaker is the book. So if you just put Kingmaker in, you should be able to find that. And then also, I wanted to let you know that my sister and I, who has done some of these with me before, will be over on Instagram actually doing an Instagram Live tomorrow, tomorrow evening at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. There is a post on my Instagram at Julia Kelly Writes, and also in my Instagram stories where you can get reminded of the event. And we're going to be knitting again. Since there will be two of us, I'll get to actually do some knitting, um, and we'll be able to chat a bit, and you guys can ask her some questions if you like as well. I suspect she's going to grill me about various things, but we should have a nice knit and chat and talk about the Dressmakers of London, talk about knitting, talking about sewing, and all sorts of things. So please do join us, and I look forward to talking to you guys again sometime soon.